in the Old Testament. The first tithe is the priest and Levites. They received a portion of some of the offerings the Israelites brought to the tabernacle. Read the Bible in Numbers chapter 18 and verse 21. The Bible says, I give to the Levites all the tithe in Israel as their inheritance in return for the work they do while serving at the tent of the meeting. For the Levites and the priests, they did not have to have any inheritance. For them, their inheritance or their portion was the tithe that was given by the other tribes of Israel to God in the tent of meeting. So that was their portion. That is the first type, the priest and Levites. The second type of sacrifice was what was called the sacred festival. The people were to set aside a tenth of their special meal in the presence of the Lord each year. And the Bible is telling us in Exodus chapter 14 and verse 23. The Bible says, eat the tithe of your grain, new wine and oil, olive oil, and the firstborn of your hands and frogs in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. Number one, they are telling you is eat the tithe of your grain. Number two, at the dwelling for his name where God chooses. We know the dwelling of our God is in the church. That those days it was the tent of meeting. I know the people who are anti-tithe or people who are against giving tithe, they are focusing on this verse. There is one person in TikTok who is called Mbote. Mbote is quoting this verse and telling people, don't be cheated by the pastors. The Bible says that we gather at the tithe and we eat. Not the pastors to eat, but we eat. So if you are his follower, that's just part of the tithe. Then this tithe was given annually. It was given once a year. So some people are focusing on this, fighting against the giving of tithe in the church. The third type of the tithe was given for orphans, widow, and the poor. The Bible is telling us every 3 years the people were called to give a special tithe to the most needy of their society. Read the Bible in Deuteronomy chapter 26 and verse 12. The Bible says, when you have finished setting aside a tenth of all your produce, in the third year, the year of the tithe, you shall give it to the Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, the widows, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. It was gathered after 3 years, and it was kept somewhere so that the widows, the poor, the foreigners, and even the Levites would still use that tithe to the glory of his name. And when you look at all the 3 tithes together, we find that the first is an ongoing tithe. The priest and Levite tithe is an ongoing one. It was done on daily, whenever they were giving or whenever they were going for their sacrifices. Then you find the second one was an annual tithe. They would do it once in a year. They would gather together, bring their tithe where God in the dwelling of God, and the Bible tells that they would celebrate and eat whatever God had given them. The third one, it was given every third year. It was given after 3 years, and it was given so that it would be able to help to assist the poor, the widow, the foreigners, and still the Levites were in the same category with these people. In the Old Testament, you find there are other prescribed free will offerings, which is up and above the tithe. You find that a good example is Moses. When Moses was building the tabernacle, the Bible speaks about in Exodus chapter 36, he was able to call the Israelites, and he told the Israelites to give towards the building of the tabernacle. And the Bible says that they gave more than, they exceeded whatever was needed. And because of that, that would call it a free will offering. Also in Ezra chapter 1 verse 5 to 6, you find when Ezra was rebuilding the temple, he was able to rebuild the temple using what we call the free will, giving. They were used for the project and development. So the tithe, although it's commanded, it is just, there's other up and above giving that should be given from in the Bible. Then we go to the New Testament. I know other people who are against giving tithe would always like to quote New Testament and say that Jesus did not speak about the tithe. But New Testament just affirms giving generously to meet the needs. And you know what? Jesus says he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. That is in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 to 18. The Bible says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophet. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Then verse 18 says, for truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. He is not fighting the tithe. He came to emphasize and fulfill the law. He also says in number 2 that Jesus mentioned the practice of tithing in the parable of the Pharisees and the tax collector. You read the Bible,